When it comes to cinema, the definition of disturbing may vary from person to person depending on your sensitivity level or personal preferences. What one person may believe is far surpassing the limit might actually be pretty tame based off your own personal standards. But there are certain films out there that exist purely to see how many limits they can push, which in most circumstances have been deemed disturbing by the vast majority that witnesses them. And in some cases even leading to them being banned in certain states or countries. And those are the ones that we're going to be taking a look at today. So here are 10 disturbing horror films that got banned for being too shocking. Number 1 is a Serbian film. I'm sure this one came as no surprise, as this film contains some of the most disturbing scenes in all of cinema history. Released in 2010, the plotline follows a retired adult film star that agrees to do one last film which will have him set up for the remainder of his life. But eventually he begins to realize that what he agreed to participate in is nothing short of a snuff film that displays just about every debauched act you could imagine under the sun. If you happen to be sensitive to anything involving children, then heed my warning. Watch at your own risk. Number 2 is Cannibal Holocaust. If you've ever researched a disturbing horror film list before, I can guarantee that you've stumbled across this title at least once or twice. Released in 1980, the plot follows a rescue team that discovers footage of a documentary crew that went missing in the Amazon jungle while observing cannibalistic tribes. The level of violence depicted in this film was deemed as so realistic that the director, Ruggero Deodato, was arrested on the belief that the characters were actually butchered. But while the murders were obviously fake, the slaying of certain animals portrayed were absolutely real, which is why I personally have only seen this film twice and have no desire to see it again. Number 3 is Salo. Okay, this one I gotta admit, I actually haven't seen the complete film all the way through due to it being so incredibly hard to find in its entirety, but I have seen a good 70% of it, and I also own the book that it was inspired off of entitled 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade. This 1975 artsy film centers around 4 wealthy, powerful men who kidnap a handful of young men and women and barricade themselves inside of a castle for 120 days. During this time, they indulge in every possibly conceived twisted fantasy that their heart desires. Everything you could imagine, from sexual torture to extreme violence to even the consumption of feces and bodily fluids. Number 4 is I Spit on Your Grave. When it comes to really shocking or disturbing films, this one is a classic. Released in 1978, the plotline follows a young woman who is sexually assaulted by a group of men at her lakeside cabin. One by one, she then begins to hunt each of them down, slaughtering them in very gruesome ways, which to me is really the only redeeming factor about the film. In my opinion, the assault scene was far too drawn out, as it lasted in and of itself over 30 minutes. Number 5 is Martyrs. I gotta say, this one had me feeling everything emotionally short of enraged while watching it. This 2008 French-Canadian horror is centered around 2 young women who return to take revenge on the abusers of one of them from childhood. But not long after everything begins to take a turn for the worse, the other girl is then abducted by the abusers and their evil plan begins to unfold. I'm also going to give a trigger warning because this film displays graphic, obscene amounts of physical abuse. Number 6 is Antichrist. This one personally had me cringing at certain moments. Now I will say that this one is definitely a unique horror film because there are no jump scares, for example, but the atmosphere is incredibly bleak and the slow buildup is definitely worth the wait. Starring the legendary Willem Dafoe and released in 2009, this artsy horror film follows 2 grieving parents that are coping with the loss of their son. After retreating to a private cabin in the woods to try and heal and move on, things go from bad to next level twisted as the mother begins to spiral into a psychotic breakdown. Number 7 is Murder Set Pieces. This 2004 slasher horror film is centered around a serial killer photographer with a traumatic childhood and Class A mommy issues that has an affinity for slaying young women. Oh, and did I mention? This film originally received an NC-17 rating that had to be severely edited down. The film was banned altogether in the UK, mainly due to the extreme violence and gore depicted within. And there are also quite a few intense torture scenes and scenarios involving children, so once again, watch at your own risk. Number 8 is Faces of Death. Comprised of mostly stock footage, this 1978 docu-mocu style film displays a variety of gruesome deaths from a number of different sources. Now, while it was verified that some of the scenes were staged, it's estimated that a solid 60 to 70% of the film is authentically real. Everything from animal attacks to police footage to cannibalistic tribes to completely freak occurrences, you name it, it's in there. Number 9 is NEC Romantic. If you've got a weak stomach and still feel the need to see this film, just know that you will most likely end up with a stiff bill for having to redesign your entire living room. Released in 1988, this West German horror exploitation film is centered around a street cleaner who cleans up after grisly incidents that brings home a corpse for him and his wife to enjoy. Yeah, you heard me correctly. But the husband soon becomes apprehensive once he discovers that his wife prefers the corpse over him. Yeah, there's literally no other point to this film. And number 10 is Ichi the Killer. Considered to be a beautiful yet incredibly violent masterpiece, this 2001 Japanese action horror film follows a sadomasochistic Yakuza enforcer who begins searching for his missing boss. During this whole ordeal, he discovers a repressed psychotic killer named Ichi who works for a rival Yakuza boss. Scene after bloody scene, the entire situation quickly turns hostile with many gut-wrenching depictions of mutilation and torture. If you happen to be squeamish, this movie might not be for you. Well, there you have it, guys. 10 disturbing horror films that got banned for being too shocking. And there are still plenty of others out there that I'm sure would have been perfect for this list, so I don't know, maybe I'll make a second video sometime down the road. But for now, thank you all so much for checking out today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to show your support by smashing that like button and giving my channel a follow. And until next time, take care.